Alright, welcome all. This is a video tutorial on Fermi estimations for SSS. Hopefully you guys are having a great week. This video is just designed to kind of walk you through how to do a Fermi estimation, and hopefully it'll kind of explain the process behind it and the intuition. I think one thing that's pretty important to note about these estimations is that there's not one correct way per se of reaching the answer. There's a lot of different ways that you can go about doing these estimations, and it comes down to a variety of factors. Some of them are related to the fact that maybe you want a really specific answer, so you'll have to maybe drill further down into your tree. Versus if you want a fast answer, you'll make a lot more assumptions, which can mean that your answer is going to be probably less accurate, or maybe a couple more magnitudes off from what a more specific answer would be. So there's not one way to do it. There's multiple approaches, and even within the approaches, there's different levels of granularity in order to get to your answer. So this approach that I'm going to go through in here is the top-down approach. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to start with our question here, which is the revenue for cups of coffee sold in coffee stores in 1 year in America. And I'm going to be breaking that down into its pieces and kind of drilling down as far as I can, and then working our way back up with our calculations. So the first thing that I would say you want to do is you want to really look at what your question is asking you. So this is revenue for cups of coffee sold in coffee stores in 1 year in America. So first of all, we know this is only going to be coffee, and this is only going to be coffee that's sold in stores. So this doesn't mean, if you go to the supermarket and you buy coffee grounds and then you make that at home, that's not included in this question, and that's going to be important to know, because if you thought you need to calculate something like that, you're going to be doing a lot of work, right? You're going to be looking at like the cost of the total bag, and then looking at how many cups you can get out of each bag, and doing all these calculations. So right, so you don't need to do that, and you also want to note that this is going to be sold in 1 year, and this is going to be in America. So we're only looking at a 1 year time span, and we're not looking at the world, we're looking at just America. So now that we kind of know what we're looking at, what I like to do is I like to kind of approach the first part by thinking, how can I break this down? And a common trend that you'll see, it's not always true, but a common trend is you can kind of look at really the first word and figure out how to break that down. So this is revenue, right? Revenue for cups of coffee. And that can be broken down into let me break this down. So this can be broken down into the total cups of coffee sold in coffee stores in 1 year in the U.S. In the U.S. And this can be multiplied by the average cost per cup of coffee. Right? So you'd agree that the revenue, the total amount of money generated from all these cups of coffee, is going to be the total number of cups of coffee sold in these coffee stores times the average cost for every single cup of coffee. So that's why I say that sometimes, but not always, a way to get started is to look at the kind of first word and figure out, how can I break that down? And you'll want to be specific with how you're breaking things down. So, the rest of the wording kind of stays the same, right? So you'll notice, let's see if I got my highlighter here, right? Cups of coffee sold in coffee stores in 1 year in the U.S. is basically the same as cups of coffee sold in coffee stores in 1 year in the U.S. So I'm really just focusing on this revenue part when I'm breaking down these trees. Okay. Oh, and another note, when you're making these boxes, you'll kind of want to leave some space at the bottom, and that's just so that when you're writing in your numbers later on, you can write them in there. You can write your number off to the side or on top or something like that, but it's just an organizational thing that I find to be useful, as I kind of leave a little bit of space at the bottom. So now if we look at this next layer, we have our total cups of coffee sold in coffee stores in 1 year in the US, which I think I could break that down further. But let me look at the other side, which is the average cost per cup of coffee. I don't think I can really break that down any further. That's just something I need to estimate. So this right-hand tree kind of ends there, and we're only going to focus on the left-hand tree. And this is also kind of why I find it more useful to kind of make your own tree diagrams, because then, I don't have a bunch of extra unnecessary webbing or roots basically on the right side, because I can't estimate that any further. So let's focus on the left side here, breaking this down. Total cups of coffee is probably something I want to focus on, right? So total cups. And I can break this down into the total number of people that buy coffee in coffee stores. So now we're just using the wording again. In 1 year in the US. And this is multiplied by the average number of cups of coffee per person per year. So we can kind of walk through the intuition behind that. So I want to know the total number of these cups of coffee that are being sold. In order to figure out the total number of cups of coffee, well, I can get that by figuring out how many people are buying coffee and around how many cups of coffee is each person buying in these stores per person. Or sorry, how many cups of coffee is each person buying in coffee stores every year in America? And so, I think if you do this the first couple of times, you'll be thinking, how do you know what to put in there? You do it a couple of times, you kind of build the intuition, but you always just kind of want to be thinking of, how can I break this down, right, into its constituents, into things that will multiply together to kind of come to it. And so now let's look at these pieces. So we have the total number of people that buy coffee in coffee stores in the U.S. And I want to know, this total number of people that are really buying coffee. So this is actually pretty interesting, right? Total number of people that buy coffee in coffee stores. This is something that's pretty interesting, right? Because if you think about it, there's a lot of ways you can not a lot, I guess. There's really only two, right? Either you're buying coffee in stores or you're making it yourself. And we really only want to know about the first. We don't really care about the second. So let's figure out this first out of the subset of the total population of people who are drinking coffee, right? So this could be the total number of coffee drinkers in the US. So this is a total number. Everybody who drinks coffee in the US is falling into here. And then we're just going to multiply this by the percentage of coffee drinkers that buy coffee. Right? Now, you might be asking at this point, well, hold on, what about people who both buy coffee and make it at home? And that is something that you can consider. For the sake of this Fermi estimation, we're not really going to pay too much attention to them because we're going for a relatively quick estimation. If you were very specific about it, you could consider them too. But I would just say that for the sake of this demonstration, we're not going to pay too much attention to that subpopulation. And as a note, if you were to pay attention to that subpopulation, it would take a lot more time suddenly. And I can explain that a little bit as we build out this tree a little bit more and we're kind of writing in the numbers. I can explain why it'll take a lot more time if you want to look at people who are both buying coffee and brewing it at home. So let's pay attention now to the right side, which is the average number of cups of coffee per person per year. This is something that I could break down because if I were to estimate this, it would be a bit hard, right? I don't entirely know this number off the top of my head. Also, because I don't really drink coffee, but I could break this down into the average number of cups of coffee per person per week. I can estimate that relatively well. And then this can just be weeks in a year. So again, if you don't need this step, if you feel like you can accurately estimate the average number of cups of coffee per person per year, then you don't need to have this extra branch in the tree. So part of these Fermi estimations is also being able to work within your own limits and knowing kind of how you function best and kind of what you need to do. But let's see if we can break any of these further. So this right hand side is pretty solid. We can't really break this down any further. I could do like average number of cups of coffee per person per day, I guess, and do days per week. But in that case, I may as well have just done it up here, right? I may as well have just done, days here and turned this from days per year. So, there's not really a reason for me to do that. So I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to focus on the left-hand side here. So total number of coffee drinkers in America. Well, I can focus on this. Total number, right? Total number. Oh, whoops. Coffee drinkers. I'm basically focusing on the entire thing. When I break this down into the population of America, and this is multiplied by the percentage of Americans that drink coffee. Sorry for my handwriting. Okay. So now I'll want to do another check. Can I break this down any further? I don't really think so, right? We have the population of America. That's going to be given to you. And then the percentage of Americans that drink coffee, that's just something you need to estimate. So for me, I changed my pen color because I think it's easier. I do red. And now we work our way from the bottom up. So you work your way from the bottom up because we have all these percentages now. And you need to, get your numbers from below in order to figure out your percentages above. So let's start off with our population in America. This should be given to you, which is 330 million. As a rule of thumb, there's a couple percentages you'll want to know, or a couple numbers you want to know, like population in America, population in the world. Sometimes you want to know population in California, but they'll usually be given to you. So I don't think you need to memorize them, unless it's something like population in America, then probably have that memorized. And then the percentage of Americans that drink coffee. So now this is something you need to estimate. In the Fermi estimations, a lot of your variation, your answer is going to come from, well, first, like how granular are you? And also like, what are your estimations going to look like? And it doesn't matter too much if your estimations are spot on. What matters more is that you can somewhat justify them. So because we're working semi-quickly here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time breaking down every single age group in America and like what percentage I think would drink coffee and like explanations for all that. We're doing a relatively high level approach here, and so what I'll probably do is I'll probably think really young people, right? So people who are like 10 years and below, they're probably not going to be drinking coffee, and population between like 10 and maybe 18. A good amount of people will be drinking coffee, but a lot of them also will not be drinking coffee yet, right? And then if I think about college students and working professionals, a lot of people drink coffee, but again, there is a population of people that don't drink coffee. And then the older generation, a lot of people are drinking coffee. So maybe I'll make a conservative estimate that around 60% of these Americans drink coffee. And again, it doesn't matter how spot on you are. Let's say the true percentage was like 20%. That's okay if you say 60%, as long as you can justify it. And the end, your answer will just be a couple magnitudes off. So now I'm going to multiply these two numbers together to get our total number of coffee drinkers in the U.S. And this is going to give us 198 million. Oops, 198 million. So I've done that calculation already. And now I'll want to focus on, this term right here, because I need to multiply it by the term we just got in order to get this new term up there. So our percentage of coffee drinkers that buy coffee. So you'll want to think about the fact that there are a lot of people who are going to be brewing coffee at home. But I think a lot of people, especially the younger generation, college students, working professionals, the majority of them are going to be buying their coffee. And I think it's really only like, quite old people who are brewing their own coffee. So I'm going to estimate that maybe around 75% of these people buy coffee. And kind of going back to a point I made earlier about why the more granular you get, the more complicated these Fermi estimations will get. Let's say hypothetically you were going to include the fact that there are some people who buy coffee and some people who brew their coffee at home. If you were to do this, then the total number of people that are buying coffee in stores That number in and of itself shouldn't change. But what should change is the total cups of coffee that are being sold in stores, right? Because you have some people who are buying the coffee in stores, but they're not actually going to buy all their coffee in stores, right? So effectively, the way I would approach it is you would create these different age groups. So you'd create people who are like, between the ages of like 10 to 20, and then 20 to 40, 40 to 60, and 60 to 80. And you would go through, just because these people probably have similar characteristics, and you would be estimating, what percentage of people are drinking coffee, what percentage of these people are just kind of brewing it at home. So the point is, it will get a lot more complicated very quickly. So for the sake of this demonstration, we're going to stick with this, but if you are curious about breaking it down by age groups and being a little more granular, then feel free to, send me a question or ask your GSI, and they can definitely help you with that. So sorry for that detour, let's get back on track. So we have a total number of coffee drinkers in the US, that's 198 million. And then we have our percentage of coffee drinkers that buy coffee, we're going to estimate 75%. And so when we do that together, we have 148.5 million. And I was focusing on the right side too. So the average number of cups of coffee drinking per week per person per week. I'm going to estimate that most people are going to drink around 2 cups of coffee on the weekdays because they have work, and then maybe they'll drink 1 cup of coffee each day on the weekends because they just needed to wake up in the morning. So that'll give us 12 cups of coffee per person per week. And we're going to estimate that there's around there are 52 weeks in a year. So multiply these two together to get 624. So you might be saying, well, Nikolai, there are some people who drink more coffee per week, some people who drink less coffee per week. Again, right, this is an estimation. You could break this down by age groups and say certain age groups drink more and get really specific with it. But for this, we don't need to get too deep into it. So now we have 148.5 million on the left and 624 on the right. We'll multiply those two together to get 92.664 billion. This is the total cups of coffee sold in coffee stores in 1 year in the US, which seems huge, by the way. And we need to now estimate our average cost per cup of coffee. And this is a cost to consumer, so this is not a cost to the business. So maybe we should have worded this as average price. And again, I don't drink coffee, but I'm going to estimate it's around $4 a cup. Sorry, let me get that in red. $4 a cup. So now we'll multiply this by 92.664 billion to get that the total revenue of cups of coffee sold in coffee stores in 1 year in America is $370.656 billion, which is a huge number, which means that we probably overestimated somewhere. I would assume it's probably somewhere in this percentage of coffee drinkers that buy coffee. Maybe not this high of a percentage buys them. But again, the point of these Fermi estimations is to get within a magnitude or so of the true correct answer. So hopefully this kind of process made sense. If you have any questions or you want some further clarification, feel free to reach out to me or any of the GSIs or any of the tutors. And hope you have a great school year.